Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Kuf Chaf Hey. Today's stuff is sponsored by Glenda Sachs Jaffe in honor of Sari Esterman's birthday and on her first grandchild, and to Rona Fink on the birth of another grandchild, Yom Holedet Sameach and Mazal Tov. Very nice to hear good news on days like this. I know we've all been struggling with the news in general, so it's good to have smachot and things to celebrate. Wishing chizuk to everyone to get through this, again, more difficult period than the usual difficult. Okay, we're going to get started with a bit of a review because I want to put everything in a context and then we're going to move on from there. So bear with me for a short few minutes of review. We started on Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet with this opinion that we found out on yesterday's daf that was really only Rebbe's opinion and the rabbis disagreed about a Bechor getting Pishnayim of Shevach of any, remember the Bechor gets the Pishnayim, the double portion, only of things that were in the possession of the father. The question is, how do we view any kind of enhancements that happened on their own? So we saw that Rebbe said enhancements, so that happened on their own, that's considered as if it was in the hands of the father. Whereas the rabbi said, no, it isn't. Okay, even enhancements that happened on their own, they didn't exist at the time, right? And then we saw that Rav Papa said, well, that's only if they changed, like it was flowers, and then it became fruit grew out of the flower. But if it was the same thing, then yes, but we're talking about some sort of transformation happened. That's already not considered ra'oi. That's considered ra'oi, not muhzak, right? It's considered something that will come to the father, which means the bechor doesn't get pishnayim. Then we got to this question of a loan, and where does a loan fall? And then we said that Shmuel holds, and then we brought basically, and again, zooming out, we have a machloket between Shmuel and the rabbis in Israel, and a Meimar and Nehardea from Nehardea going on the side of the rabbis in Israel versus Shmuel, who disagree within the opinion of the rabbis. Okay, it's not that they hold by Rebbe or the rabbis, they say within the opinion of the rabbis that we view these things as ra'oi, and enhancements that happen on their own are considered just, right, not part of the father's property. What would they say about a loan? So according to Shmuel, the Bechor doesn't get Pishnayim of a loan either. A loan is just like that. It wasn't in the property of the father at the time because he hadn't gotten paid back. So the Bechor doesn't get Pishnayim when somebody pays back a loan. So that's simply the rabbi's opinion, right? That's kind of going in the same vein. We said, why do you even need to tell us this? Isn't it obvious if it's the rabbi's opinion? To which we said, well, you might have thought that a loan, since you have a document, it's as if it was paid back, and maybe it was like it was in the hands of the father. Came Shmuel to say, we don't say that. Okay, don't think that. Now that's to go against what the rabbis in Israel, which by the way, most people think it's Rabbi Elazar specifically. When it says Shalchu Mitam, they sent from Israel, it's Rabbi Elazar's opinion. It's not so important for our purposes, but let's call it Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said that you get the Pishnayim from the loan, not the interest, which shows that he wasn't talking according to Rebbe, because Rebbe said loan and interest, all of it. Okay, because that's Rebbe. Rebbe thinks all the enhancements you get, that's like enhancements. You have a document which is worth something and worth even more than it was originally worth because of the interest. Again, interest to a Gentile, and that will all go. But Rabbi Elazar, or the rabbis in Israel, were talking according to the opinion of the rabbis and said, even the rabbis think that a loan is as if it was already paid back. On that, we then brought a Meimar who said the same thing. And then we said, oh, a Meimar holds like the rabbis of Nehardea. Who's that? Rav Nachman. Now, we're going to bring, right, so we ended with Rav Nachman and Raba. Rav Nachman and Raba both disagree about when we say it's as if it was collected. And here, the details of what they disagree about is not really important for the flow of the Gemara. I mean, it will be because we're going to deal with it. But the flow of the Gemara was a Meimar holds like Rav Nachman. And Rav Nachman made this distinction between whether the loan is paid back in money or property, which I'm going to get to in 1 minute, but I want before we get there to understand this proof. So they said, oh, a Meimar holds like Rav Nachman, that's like other people in his town, Nehardea, who basically agreed that it's considered as if it was returned. Now, it's true Rav Nachman said only in a particular case, but that doesn't really interest us so much because the point is Rav Nachman does seem to show that he thinks that the firstborn can get a double portion, at least in a particular situation of a loan. So that was showing that a Meimar holds like Rav Nachman. We're going to see that by the conclusion of this sugya, and there's a big machlok at how to understand the last line of this section. It could be that Rav Nachman doesn't actually hold what we think Rav Nachman holds. And actually, this is rejected, this connection of Amemar to Rav Nachman. But it could be in another interpretation, it could be accepted. So I just want to point that out because we're going to come back to this. Right now, what we're trying to say is, Rav Nachman says, and now we'll read Rav Nachman and Rabba inside. Rav Nachman, I'll start with Rav Nachman, even though he's the second one, because we're on it right now. And we're at the bottom of Kuf Chaf Dalid, Gavu Ma'ot Yeshlo, Gavu Karkein. The Bechor will get Pishnayim if the loan is paid back in money. Because it's as if, since the father lent money and received money in return, it's as if that money that the father gave, which then the father receives in the end, it was as if he had the money already. Because also the document says, the father's owed money. It almost has monetary value in and of itself, that document. So it's as if the money was received, okay, before, even though it wasn't. So what do you see there? Again, the main point being that Rav Nachman thinks the Bechor could get Pishnayim of a milveh, of a loan. Okay? And therefore, when a Meimer held like the rabbis of Eretz Israel, he wasn't really holding like the rabbis of Eretz Israel. He was going in line with what they said in Nahardea, which means Rav Nachman, who lived a few generations before him. Rabba thinks the reverse. Gavu karka yeshlo, gavu ma'ot aimlo. Right? It's only if it was land. Why land? Yes. And money, no. Land is considered muhzak because as soon as the loan was taken out, the land of the love was mishuabad, was already liened to the father as the lender. So it was as if the land, since the father could go and collect it from the land of the borrower, it was as if it was already in the possession of the father. Okay, that's Rabba's logic. Whereas money, we always say, mo lahalva anitna, right? The money is always lahutza anitna. It's given when I lend you money, I give you cash, you spend it, you'll give me back other cash. So you can't say the cash is muhzak in the hands of the father because the father is going to get back different money. Okay, but the land from the moment one is already liened, and therefore it's as if the land is there. Now, if we go to Rav Nachman now, and let's just explain one more thing about Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, money, yes, because it's like money for money. You gave $100, you get $100 back. It's true, it's not the exact same $100, but that's what the loan is worth. So you have a document that says you owed $100. It's as if it's in your hands already. But it's as if it's already collected kind of thing. But not land. Why not land? Because land, even though the land is liened, the borrower can always say, oh, I'm going to pay you in cash. So the land doesn't really the father has zero ownership over the land because the land, it's not that the land is definitely going to be used to pay for the loan. They could always just pay in money, or they could pay in one piece of land and not the other piece of land. So how can you say that the land is as if it's in the father's possession? So he has a totally opposite approach to Rabba. Now come the difficulties that Abaye raises. Amalei Abaye. So we're at the very bottom of Kuf Chaf Dalid. I hope the intro, you'll see why in the end. The intro will be worth it because it gives you the perspective on the sugya from a distance. Amalei Abaye l'Rabba. L'didach kashya l'Rav Nachman kashya. So again, we're within this opinion that the Bechor gets Pishnayim, but only in a particular situation according to Rabba, when it's land that's given back, and according to Rav Nachman, when it's money that's given back. So comes Abaye and says to Rabba, L'didach kasha and the Rav Nachman kasha. I've got issue with you, and I've got issue with Rav Nachman. And it's going to be the same structure. There's going to be two difficulties with each. The first difficulty is kind of going to be the same, and the second one will be a similar type of difficulty you'll see in a minute. L'didach kasha, your opinion is difficult because Maishna ma'otelo. Why do you think that if they pay back in money, it's considered ra'oy and not muhzak? It's considered something that wasn't in the possession of the father at the time of death. Delav hani ma'ot shavakavuho, because that's not the same money that the father gave out in the loan. Is the same. It's not the same money that the father gives back, right? That's what you said. That was the explanation of Rabba. This, right? You gave one money. There's other money coming later. It wasn't in the hands of the father in between, and it's not the same money that's coming back. Well, karkanami for the same token, on that same note, Karkanami, Lav HaKarka Shavakavuhon, right? That land is not really designated as much as you say it is for this loan. Just like money, it's not like there's money in the wallet that's set aside to pay back this loan. There's not land that's set back to pay back, that's set aside to pay back for the loan because, again, even if they gave land back in the end, they didn't have to. They could have given him money instead. So the land, in the same way, not money, not land. If you're going to say not money, then you should say not land. And we're going to see when he goes to Rav Nachman, he's going to say the reverse. If you say not land, then you should say not money. Okay, that's how the first question on each is going to be, again, a bit of a different question, but the same idea. If that doesn't work, then the other shouldn't work either. Ve'od, and furthermore, and the second question on each of them is going to be based on something you said somewhere else. So he says, Ha'atuda Amart, you yourself, Rabba said. Now, let's just go back for a minute. Rabba by us said, if land is liened, okay, then it's as if it's already in the possession of the father. You said, Rabba, mistaber tama de b'nei ma'arav. Now, you have to remember all these. You don't have to. I'll remind you of them. But we're going to basically quote something from the end of a sugya. Okay, the very end of this stuff is going to basically, this amud and into the next is going to say, what's that case? And we're going to go into detail into the case. It's very hard to go on, though, without telling you some of the details of the case. So I'll have to fill them in right now, but we'll see it inside. There's this situation where there was a man who was on his deathbed and said, my possessions will go in the meantime to my grandmother. It could be to his mother, and she's called grandmother because we're going to compare it to his daughter. So it's unclear whether you say grandmother or mother. It doesn't really matter so much for our purposes. Let's just say grandmother, because that's the word. It's going to be safta, this case of a safta. My possessions will go to my grandmother in the meantime. And when she dies, it'll go to my heirs. Now, his heirs happen to be his daughter. He had one daughter, no sons. So basically what he was doing is instead of directly sending his property to his daughter, which is what should have happened, he basically said, well, all the life of my grandmother, and it was kind of like saying, I want to support my grandmother first, make sure she, has what she needs. Okay, or maybe his mother. So I think the story actually makes more sense with the mother because it's unlikely we're going to see the daughter dies before the grandmother, right? In those days, it was before it was the daughter's great grandmother, right? It was an unlikely situation in those days, especially with a short lifespan, that this would all happen. But either way, it could be grandmother, it could be her great grandmother. What he basically says is those details aren't important. My possessions will first go to her. When she dies, it'll go to my heirs being his daughter. But what happened in the story was the daughter died before the grandmother. So the daughter dies before the grandmother or / great grandmother. And her husband says, that goes to me now. Because when the grandmother dies, so again, first the father dies. His property goes straight to the grandmother, not to his daughter. The daughter dies. The grandmother dies after that. And when the grandmother dies, it should go to the daughter. Now the daughter's dead. So who wants to get it? Her heirs. Who are her heirs? Her husband. Her husband says, right, the first in line to inherit is the husband. What's the problem? Just like the Bechor, and this is why we're comparing it, doesn't get anything that's ra'oi, only muhzak, only things that are in the possession of the person at the time of death. Likewise, in that case, it's the father, it's the firstborn. Same thing with a husband. A husband only inherits his wife with property that was in her hands at the time of death. Now, she died, and this wasn't in her hands yet. It was still in the grandmother's hands because the grandmother was still alive. So that's the whole background. Now, we're going to see that the Bnei Ma'arava, who are the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, again, we're going to have a Shalchu Mitam, and they say it's Rabbi Elazar, who's the student of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Elazar says there that this is considered not in the possession of the daughter at the time of death, and therefore the husband doesn't get it. To which Rabba here comes in. Okay, so we're going to eventually see the whole back and forth and debate, and there's a lot more there, which we're going to see on Amud Bet today. But right now, we just are concerned with the very end of the sugya, which is, you said, Rabba, mistaber tama de b'nei Rabba. I agree with the b'nei Rabba. Some people thought the husband gets it. He says, no. I agree with the ones in Eretz Yisrael who say the husband doesn't get it. Why? Di'ikadim safta v'zapna zvina zvine. All the while that the grandmother was alive, she got the possessions at that point, right? They were inherited by her temporarily. But she had the rights to sell them if she wanted. So if she were to sell them and then die, and the daughter was still alive, the daughter wouldn't get them because the sale was a valid sale. It was given to her for, let's say, 10 years, okay? She inherited them for 10 years. And then they go to the daughter, but they only go to the daughter if they're still in existence. If the grandmother sells them, then the daughter doesn't get anything. So what do you see? It's clearly not muhzak in the hands of the daughter, because why? Because the grandmother could have sold them, which means they were not in the possession of the daughter, which means the husband doesn't get it. Now, why does that have to do? Why is that a question on what we just said? Let's take our Lov and Malva case. Here we have someone who borrowed money. Okay, let's call him Reuven. Reuven borrowed money from Shimon. Okay, not his brother. Shimon dies, and Reuven wants to give back the money to Shimon's heirs. Now, at this point, what happens? The question is, was it considered as if it was in Shimon's property beforehand? Right? So Rabba said, if Reuven pays back the loan in land, then yes, because the land was liened to Shimon in the first place from the moment the loan was taken when Shimon was still alive. But according to Rabba, now you answer me, let's just assume Reuven had 10 fields. Could he have sold any one of those fields if he wanted? Of course. It was his, right? They all belong to Reuven. Yes, they're liened to Shimon, but as long as Reuven has another field to give to Shimon or money to give to Shimon, he can go sell it, and it's a totally valid sale. So what do you see here? Just like the grandmother could have sold it, and therefore that means it was not considered muhzak by the daughter. Likewise here, since Reuven could have sold it, it's not considered muhzak in the hands of the malveh, of the loaner, of the lender. And therefore, we're going to say, this is a difficulty with what you said, Rabba. You said if they pay back in land, it's as if the land was owned by Shimon from the first place. And therefore, the Bechor gets Pishnayim. But since Reuven could have sold that land, according to what you said, the fact that someone can sell it means that it's not in the other person's possession, right? If one person can sell it and it's a valid sale, it means it's not owned by the other one, even if they have some sort of claim, lien on that property. So that's his difficulty with Rabba. Okay, I see you said about the land. I read very quickly, Terry, but there's something called apotiki, which is this particular land is for you. Okay, maybe it would be different in that case, but this isn't the case. Okay, now it could be even then you could say, since you could still pay it back theoretically in money, I think in apotiki, if you not sure, but it's a good question. So now let's go back. So that was the difficulty with Rabba. We're not going to get an answer yet. We're going to continue with Abaye, and now he's going to bring the difficulty for Rav Nachman. And you'll see the structure is the same, but the content is different, obviously. The Rav Nachman Kashya. Difficulty number one, Maishna Karka Dilo. Now, you said land for sure is not considered muhzak, only if they return it in money, because money for money, right? And the shtarchov is worth money kind of thing. So cash, yes, not land. Well, why do you think Karka not? Delav HaKarka Shavakavuon. Because it's not, right, the land wasn't really designated exactly for the father, because Reuven, the borrower, could have given back money and not land. So no. Well, nami. For the same token, lav hane maot shavakavuhom. It's not like there's exact dollar bills in the possession of Reuven that are designated for Shimon, right? Milva lahotza anitna. Exactly the reason why Rabba said the opposite. Just money is money, right? It's just cash and it's fluid. It's the one that went is not the one he's getting back. This isn't designated. You can't say that Shimon already possessed it before he died. You can't say that. Ve'od, and furthermore, now he's going to bring something Rav Nachman said, just like last time he brought something Rabba said that contradicted, right? Where he contradicts himself. Here we're going to bring somewhere where Rav Nachman contradicts himself. Now, remember, Rav Nachman thinks that land that's liened is not in the possession of the father if he didn't receive it back before he died. Well, here we're going to see that Rav Nachman thinks it is. Okay, this is a different issue. It's something we've learned before. What orphans have when the father dies with a loan outstanding that the father owes to somebody, the lender can only collect the loan if the father left land for the orphans. He can't collect it from movable property that was left. He can only collect it if there was land that was left. So now orphans who own land from the father that they inherited from and they can't take it from things that orphans purchase later, okay? Only things that are in the possession of the father at the time of death, okay? Land. only from land. So now comes Rav Nachman and says, and Abaye quotes this to Rav Nachman, or quotes it to Rabba. He's questioning Rabba about him and Rav Nachman's opinions. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Ravua. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba bar Ravua, not the same Rabba, Yitomim shegavu karka bechovat avihen. There's one exception to this rule I just told you. I said that if someone wants to collect a loan from the orphans, it has to be from land the father owned at the time. But it could also be from land that the orphans collected off a loan of their fathers. So if the Yatomim if the father was owed money by someone, okay, let's call him Yehuda, and Yehuda returns the money after Shimon died, so the Yatomim, the sons of Shimon, Shigavu Karka B'Chovad Abihem, that got land back from a loan their father was owed, Baal Chov Choser V'Goveh Mehen. If Shimon not only had a loan to collect, but also owed money, once the land comes in, that land can be used to pay the loan. Even though, what did we say? Right? What does it show here? Land that comes in for a loan is considered as if it was in the possession of the father when the father died. Because otherwise, how could we use it to pay back the loan? Because again, loans can only pay back from land that was in the father's possession at the time of death. So this shows that Rav Nachman holds that land that was returned for a loan is considered as if it was in the possession of the father. That goes against what Rav Nachman said. Rav Nachman said only money, if it's returned, it's as if it was the possession of the father. If it was land, it's not. So those are the two difficulties on Rabba and the two difficulties on Rav Nachman. So again, first difficulty is, why do you make this distinction at all? If you're going to say this one, then the other. If you're going to say this is not muhzak, then that should be not muhzak. And the reverse for Rav Nachman, if you say that one's not muhzak, then that one shouldn't be muhzak. And if you're going to say, and then each of them, their approach about whether it's considered muhzak or not muhzak, right? Rabba thinks land is muhzak, and Rav Nachman thinks land isn't muhzak. Well, they each say the reverse in different situations. To which the answer is, Amar lei, lo l'didi kasha v'lo l'Rav Nachman kasha. Rabba resolves the difficulty both against himself and the difficulty against Rav Nachman. And he said, I'm going to just, in one fell swoop, I'm going to knock out all your questions. Tama de b'nei ma'arava kamrinan, v'lan lo sfiralan. When we made this distinction and we had this argument, Mammon yes, land no, land yes, Mammon no. Okay, when we had this argument over which pishnayim does he get, in which case does he get the Bechor get pishnayim for the returning of this loan, we were only talking about according to what the Bnei Eretz Yisrael said, okay, or perhaps Rabbi Elazar, as the commentaries claim. We were just explaining him. In other words, what happened? In Ma'arava, they said, right, Shalchumitam, they sent, Bechor no tel pishnayim b'milveh, but not be repeat, right? The Bechor gets pishnayim of a loan, not the interest. Okay, no, we don't care about the interest right now. We're putting that aside. Now, Raba and Rav Nachman both heard that when Rabbi Elazar, whoever it was who said this only in a particular situation, only if it was either money or it was land. But they were only quoting what they heard him say. They weren't talking about their own opinion. Okay, so number one, this resolves question number one against them both, because basically Abaye says, I don't know why you're making a distinction. They basically say, we don't make this distinction. We're just quoting someone else who did, but we agree with you. There's no reason to make the distinction. So when they each made this distinction, they were just saying, oh, that's what we understood was the distinction he made. But we don't hold that way. So now it's actually a funny answer, because it's not saying why maybe he made a distinction, right? They're not explaining that. They're saying, we quoted somebody we don't really agree with. Okay, and don't question. It's like sometimes you try to explain someone, and then someone says that makes no sense. You say, "Well, I didn't say that, right? They said it. It's not. I agree with you. You're right. There's no reason to make a distinction." That's number one. Number two, you're questioning it from something we said. Oh well, we're not quoting what we hold. There in the Safta Sugya and in the Yatomim that collected the loan and had to pay back. That's our opinion. But here we're just quoting someone else's opinion. So yeah. Don't question us. Now, there's a lot of, okay, you can see the daf is this amud is very short, because there's a very long tosfot on this. There's a lot of discussion about this, because there's a whole thing. Maybe their difficulties don't really like their difficulties still hold against it. Anyway, there's a lot of depth here. And what do they actually hold is a big debate. Okay. And I'll just give you the highlights, okay, without getting into the commentaries try to get this from other statements of Rabbah and other statements of Rav Nachman and Shas and other things they say to figure out what they actually hold. So the Rashbam, if I'm correct, I think it's the Rashbam says they both hold like Shmuel. They don't hold by the rabbis in Israel. They hold like Shmuel, right? It seems to be the pshat to say this. That's what they say. We were just quoting what we heard them say in Israel, but that's not what we hold by. We actually hold by Shmuel. And Shmuel holds, remember, the Bechor doesn't get Pishnayim in alone at all. And then actually, Raba and Rav Nachman agree. They just disagree about what they said in Israel, but they both agree with Shmuel. Now, there's a difficulty with this. What's the difficulty? Well, the difficulty is, if you noticed, and this I said in the beginning, but now I'm going to come back and finish it, which is a Maimar, if you remember, held like the rabbis in Israel. And then we said he goes like Rav Nachman. Now, if Rav Nachman actually holds like Shmuel and not like the rabbis in Israel and thinks the Bechor does get, right, if a Maimar holds they get Pishnayim and Rav Nachman holds they don't get Pishnayim, then all of a sudden a Maimar doesn't hold like the Nehardea rabbis. And the Gemara doesn't really point that out, that we have a problem here. So it could be, according to the Rashbam, really, it would be, yeah. In fact, we brought Rav Nachman to show Amir holds like him, but in the end he doesn't. And it's just not, it's not true. So that's option one. Option two is to say, and then Rabbi and Rav Nachman actually both agree. Option two is to stick with the fact that they both agree, but to say that they agree the opposite. They agree in theory with the rabbis of Eretz Israel that a milveh can be collected, the pishnayim, because a milveh is considered muhzak, okay? But they disagree about the distinction between land and money. Okay, that's a possibility. The third option, which I think is the most realistic option and makes sense in light of what Rav Nachman and Rabbi each said in the Safta case and in the other case, is to say that they each, in the end, what's obvious is neither distinguishes between mammon and land, but we're going to say that Rabbah holds like Shmuel, that you can't collect it all, because what did Rabbah say in the Safta case? Remember, as long as someone else can sell it, you're not considered the owner of it. So if Rabbah says you're not considered the owner, then basically, in our case, what do you say? In a loan, you're not muhzak, in which case the Bechor doesn't get pishnayim, and that fits Shmuel perfectly. And Rav Nachman, who holds that the children who got the loan back, can you, right, the whoever loaned them money can now extract that land from them because it was as if it was muhzak in the hands of the father. So Rav Nachman will say, like Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, or like a Maimar really, and then it works perfectly. A Maimar basically says, yeah, you can collect Pishnayim, and even though the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael made this distinction, depending on whether it was land or money, and we don't know which way they went, but Rav Nachman himself doesn't think there's a distinction. Rav Nachman thinks no matter what, he gets the Pishnayim. And then Rabba and Rav Nachman are on opposite sides of the coin here. Again, they agree that there's no distinction whether the loan's given back in land or money, but they disagree. And that seems to me the simplest pshat here to say. And then that fits perfectly. Both Rabbi and Rav Nachman can maintain consistency. By the way, this is quoted by Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosfot. They maintain consistency with their opinions elsewhere. And they both agree that there's no distinction, resolving the first question of Abaye. There's no distinction in land and money. It's just that each one sides on a different side of the coin. Yes, the Bechor gets Pishnayim. No, the Bechor doesn't get Pishnayim. Shmuel versus Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, right? Shmuel, they don't get. Rabba, they don't get. Rav Nachman and Ameimar and Chachmei Eretz Yisrael, they do get. Again, Chachmei Eretz Yisrael being in the middle, where they split 50-50, right? Where they depends money or land, and we don't know which distinction, but Ameimar and Rav Nachman say there is no distinction. No matter what, he gets the Pishnayim. Okay, so again, either they both agree and they both go with Shmuel, or they both agree and they both go with Chachmei Eretz Yisrael without the distinction and say, yes, he gets Pishnayim in every case. Or we have a split between Rabbah and Rav Nachman. Okay, so that's a little iyun, but without getting into all the iyun about it, all the in-depth, but it's a little bit of into these four words, right? The lan lo sfira, we don't hold that way. Well, what do you hold? Okay, and then, what you would do in a more in-depth shiur is try to understand why each one goes by that opinion, right? If Rabbeinu Tam does seem to be the most simplest, then why would you get more complicated and say something else? And that's based on other statements they make in other places. And you try to figure out what's the motivation of each approach and what are the weaknesses and strengths of each approach. Okay, let's move back to our topic. My Safta. What's the case of the Safta? So this is all like a sugya within a sugya. We already finished our sugya. We already saw the difficulties Abaye raised on Raba and Rav Nachman. And now we're just going back to the first difficulty answer Rabba, where they quoted the Safta case, where I kind of told it to you, but the Gemara didn't really go into it. So what's the case? Somebody said right, this is the guy on his deathbed. Okay, this will just be a review. This part's kind of easy. We're moving now to Amabet. We already talked about this case, but if you didn't get it the first time, you'll now get it, hopefully completely. I want my possessions now to go to my grandmother or mother, and after that to my heirs, being his daughter. Havile Barte to have a nesiba, and he had a daughter that was married. Shchiva b'chaya bala u'b'chaya safta. She died before her husband and before the grandmother died. Batar de shchiva safta. After the grandmother dies, atabal katava. The husband came along and laid claim to the possessions of the grandmother. They were really the possessions of the father. Now remember, if the father had died and the land had gone straight to the daughter, or the father had died, the land went to the grandmother first. Let's say he said this whole thing. And then the grandmother died and they went to the daughter. So when the daughter would die, the husband would inherit. That for sure. But the problem was the daughter was never alive when she inherited it. So it only got to her once she was dead. So how could he claim it? Because it's right? It's not muchzak. And he only gets muchzak, not ra'ui, not something that's coming to her. So Amar Rav Huna, despite that, and we're going to have to explain Rav Huna soon, Rav Huna says, liyarte vafilu liyarte yarte. When he said, and after that, I wanted to go to my heirs, what he meant is my heirs and my heirs' heirs, meaning if my heir is not alive, then it'll go, in this case, my daughter's not alive, it'll go to her heirs. Now, who's her heir? Her husband. So he understands the word yarte. Remember, taf and shin switch. So yarte is your shin, which is, right, my heirs. That term includes even the heirs of my heirs. Rav Anan Amar, liyarte velo liyarte yarte. Rav Anan says, what do you mean? He said heirs. He didn't say the heirs of my heirs. So it just goes to her. If it doesn't go to her, then what would happen, according to Rav Anan? Well, if the daughter's not alive, then it stays with the grandmother. Now, the grandmother's dead. So who does it go to? The grandmother's heirs. Whoever her next of kin are, which is not this granddaughter, right? The granddaughter's husband. Okay, or even the granddaughter's kids, it wouldn't be. Okay, we're going to see that in a minute. The granddaughter had children, it wouldn't go to them either because there's people first in line closer. Let's say the grandmother has sons. So we'll go to her sons. Okay, let's say the original guy's brothers are still alive. So that's what, right? So if his heir is not alive, he only said to my heir. My heir is my direct heir, not any other heirs, and therefore it stays with grandmother and goes to her heirs. Now, that so far, it doesn't actually really have to do so much with our topic, but they each side on either yes, it goes to the husband, or no, it doesn't go to the husband. Shalchumitam. Now remember, what did we quote? We quoted what Rabbi had to say about what they said in Israel. So here starts the part that connects with us. Shalchumitam. They sent from Israel. Again, let's assume it's Rabbi Elazar. Hilchata kavatei Rav Anan v'lav mitame. I hold like Rav Anan that it doesn't go to the husband, but not for the reason Rav Anan said. And not, I would even say not in the way Rav Anan said, meaning even I agree with him, the husband doesn't get it, but I actually disagree with who gets it next. Because I agree with Rav Anan, the husband doesn't get it. But lav mitame, but not for the same reason. De'ilu Rav Anan savar, afagav dehave lebrat lebarte lo yarit. Rav Anan would hold that even, this is what I told you already, I told you it because he was going to say this, because he said to my heir and not to the heirs of my heir, if the daughter's not alive, but she has a son or a daughter for all intents and purposes, it won't go. Remember what did Rabbanan say? If there's no daughter, it'll stay with the grandmother and it'll go to the grandmother's next of kin, let's say her son. If her son is still, if there's some son alive, brother of the original deceased. But I think if it goes, now, well, I agree the husband doesn't get it because of the Ra'ui Muhzak issue, because this is only Ra'ui, it wasn't in her possession at the time. But her son, of course, would get it because what did he say? When the grandmother dies, it goes to my heirs. Now, my heirs mean my daughter or my daughter's children. So if my daughter has a son, this guy's daughter had a son, I think, comes Rabbi Elazar or this rabbi from Eretz Israel and says it would clearly go to the son. So I don't completely agree with Rav Anan, but right, Velohi, I don't agree with that. That if right, according to Rav Anan, the grandson wouldn't get it. I think for sure the grandson would get this. The son of the daughter of this guy would definitely get it. But why don't I think the husband gets it? And now we bring it back to this Roy Muchzak issue. Ubal hanutayim delo yarid mishum dahabele ra'oi ve'ein abal notel b'ra'oi k'b'muchzak. The husband doesn't get it not because we darshan your shim and not your shim of your shim or your shim and your shim of your shim. That's not the reason. The reason why the husband doesn't get it, is because it wasn't in her possession at the time of death, and the husband doesn't get anything that's not in the possession at the time of death of his wife. Now, comes the Gemara and asks an obvious question now. What did Rav Huna say? Let's go back to the beginning. Rav Huna said the husband gets it. Why? Because it said your shim and your shim, the heirs, and anyone who inherits the heirs, which would include the husband. Wait a minute. How could Rav Huna possibly say that the husband inherits something that was ra'oi? Nobody thinks that the husband gets anything that the wife is supposed to inherit after her death. So Michlal de Rav, so then how say what? You think Rav Huna holds Michlal? From here you can infer that Rav Huna sabar bal notel baroi k'b'muchzak. Sounds like he thinks the husband can inherit even property that comes to the woman, the wife, after she died. How could that possibly be? To which Amar Rabbi Elazar, here comes in Rabbi Elazar, who we think is the author of, the rabbi said is the author of the Halacha of Eretz Israel. In any case, he's now explaining Rav Huna. And he says, first he comes with the statement of humility, and he says, Davar ze niftach bagdolim v'nisteim b'ktanim. This issue of Rav Huna's opinion was opened by great people, meaning Rav Huna said it, and I, the small Rabbi Elazar, who's not important at all, even though he was very important, he was a student of Rabbi Yochanan, he was very prominent, but I, the small, I'm going to close it up. In other words, I'll explain it. Kol ha'omer acharecha, Ke'omer me'achshav dami. And this is the whole lead into Rabba, okay? And why this is relevant to us. What does he say? Of course, a husband only inherits things that are muchzak in the hands of the wife. This is muchzak in the hands of the wife. Why? Kol ha'omer, anyone who says, acharecha, I'm giving this to you now, but after you die, it's going to somebody else. Ke'omer me'achshav dami is like someone who says, I'm giving it to you now, meaning, when he said, this father, or man, said, first it's going to my grandmother, then to my daughter when the grandmother dies, what he's really saying is, I'm giving it to my daughter right now. What does this mean? How is he's not? He's giving it to the grandmother. Well, he's giving it to my daughter right now. The goof, okay, this is, we've seen this many times, like Nichse Melog and all the usufruct property, that there's the actual item itself, and then there's the proceeds. So what he's basically saying, it's like a trust fund that someone else is, right? The daughter is going to inherit my trust fund, but someone else is going to live off the dividends, right? And what it makes every year, the income of that fund. And that's what he's basically saying. I'm already giving it to my daughter. So that's why he was muchzak in the hands of the daughter. It was just that the grandmother is going to live off the proceeds. Okay, now I see what you're saying in the chat. That's what Rabba is going to say. So hold off. Okay? That's how Rabbi Elazar explains Rav Huna. That what's going on here is that the grandmother doesn't really own it. It's not really hers. So, and it really is the daughter's from the beginning. Okay, even though the daughter doesn't have access to it right now, but that doesn't mean it's not hers. She owns the goof, and the grandmother has just the proceeds. Comes Raba, and Raba says, and here comes the big line that we quoted before. This is the important line. Amar Raba mistabra tama de b'nei ma'arava. No, I think the b'nei ma'arava have it right. The husband doesn't get anything. This is considered ra'oi. Why? And I'm going to prove it from this point. Di'ikadim safta v'zabna zvina zvine. I view this, that if the grandmother wanted to sell it, she could. So you can't say that the daughter owns the goof. If the grandmother has rights to sell it, that's proof that the daughter owns nothing of it right now. Because, right, nichse mulug, let's take, for example, the usufruct property of the wife when she gets married. Husband can't sell it without her consent, right? It's not his to sell. He can sell the proceeds, but he can't sell the object, the property. So comes Rebbe and he says the fact that the grandmother could sell it and the sale is valid proves that this isn't the case. Now the question is, what does Rav Huna think? Maybe Rav Huna thinks that the grandmother can't sell the property. Okay, we don't know. But that's not so important for our purposes. We don't know what Rav Huna holds. Okay, maybe Rav Huna thinks she can't sell it. Okay, that's very likely. Rav Huna is, and what Rabba is saying is, of course she could sell it. He thinks it's obvious the grandmother can sell it because it goes to her right now, and he thinks she can sell it. So therefore, again, why did we bring all this up? What does this show? That if someone else can sell it, here being the grandmother, that means that the daughter who has some sort of rights to it, we don't know exactly what her rights are that's going to go to her after the grandmother dies, it's not considered muhzak by her. It's not considered that she owns it, which is why Abaye asked the question on Rabba, when Rabba said if property is liened, then it's as if it's owned by the father. Can't possibly be, because the borrower can sell it anytime they want, has free rights to sell that land. And therefore, it's definitely not considered muhzak by the father, according to your theory, Rabba. And that was the question he asked. And that's why Rabba in the end said, I wasn't talking about my theory. I was talking about the rabbi's theory. Okay? And as I was explaining the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael and what they said, and it's not my opinion. So don't ask me questions from this because that's not what I believe. Okay? And that was just a parenthetical sugya to explain in the previous sugya when we quoted that line. Remember now, we quoted the line when Rabba comes to support the opinion of the rabbis of Israel in this sugya, he explains it in this way. Okay? And he says, I agree with them because the grandmother could really sell. And the fact that she could sell shows that she's the actual owner and not the daughter. And therefore, again, the husband doesn't inherit it because it's not muhzak, it's ra'ui. It's something that's coming to her, but is not hers at all right now. Okay, now we're going to finish with 4 sikot halacha, 4 rulings of Rav Papa, all related to our issues. Number 1, Amar Rav Papa, hilchata ein habal notel b'ro'oi k'b'muhzak. That's very easy, that we've been talking about now in the second section here. A husband only inherits items from his wife that were in her possession at the time of her death, and not things that, let's say, her father dies later. He doesn't get. Okay? Number 2, ein habachor notel b'ro'oi k'b'muhzak. Same thing with the bachor. The bachor doesn't get the pishnayim, the double portion, of things that weren't in the father's possession, of items, property, anything that wasn't in the father's possession at the time of death. Ve'ein habachor notel pishnayim b'milveh, bein shegavu karka, bein shegavu ma'ot. This is like Shmuel, where we started yesterday. Shmuel said the bachor does not get pishnayim of any loan. This goes by Shmuel, who holds by the rabbis. This is the rabbi's opinion against Rebbe. Rebbe thinks shevach, right? You would get. Rebbe even thinks you get not only the principal, you also get the interest. He says no. Bechor does not get pishnayim in a loan, whether they collected land, whether ma'ot. That whole distinction Raba and Rav Nachman said, we don't go by that either. It doesn't make a difference. Never gets the pishnayim. And we'll do the last one, even though it's on the next daf, just because it's the end of the sentence. Case 4, milvesh she'imo palge. This is a little bit complicated, hard to explain at the very end of the daf, but we'll try. A firstborn who took out a loan from his father, and then the father died. So now we have a weird case because the way the Rashbam says it is maybe ba'ayin yafa, like he borrowed money with the intent that he was kind of leaving his money in the possession of the father. Why? Because it was in his best interest. Because if the father were to die before he returned it, if it was considered in the possession of the father, he would get pishnayim. So if the firstborn himself is the borrower and then returns the money after the father's death, is that considered muhzak or not? So even if you say a regular loan isn't, perhaps the firstborn borrowed in such a way and had intent in his mind that it was as if the money was staying in the father's possession, so that when he returned it, if the father was dead when he returned it, right, you have to kind of think ahead of all this, but if the father would die before he returned it, he would get pishnayim of that. So the question is, does he get pishnayim or not? And the Gemara says palge, which is not so clear. The Rashbam understands it says we split it 50-50 because it's mamona mutal b'safek, sumchus, holkim, right? Remember Sumchus' opinion, if you're not sure what to do with money in doubt, you split it 50-50, which means the Pishnayim section of that loan, half of it goes to the firstborn and half it gets split evenly by the rest of the brothers. That's a possible explanation of palge. Some people think palge means they have a machloket, because palge can mean split, palge can mean machloket. It comes from all the same root, because the machloket is a split between two people. And it perhaps has to do with some debate that we saw. I'm not going to go into all the other opinions, but there's a lot of different ways to understand what this means. So quick review of what we did today, because it's pretty much one simple idea. We started with this machloket Shmuel and the rabbis of Israel. We had a Maimar who said, I hold with the rabbis of Israel, basically held also like the rabbis of Israel, but basically the Gemara said, oh, because he's from Nehardei, he holds like Rav Nachman. From there, we got to this opinion of Rav Nachman and Rabba, where it seemed that Rav Nachman was holding that the Bechor does get Pishnayim, like Abaye said. And then we just had this distinction, money, land. We weren't sure about this distinction. Abaye asked two questions, two difficulties on both of them, to which Rabba answered for both of them, saying, oh, yeah, we don't actually hold that way. We were just saying what in Israel they said, but we actually don't hold that way, and that resolved the questions. Again, what they actually hold, we already saw was a big debate. Then we got into one of the cases they brought was a much more complicated one than the one against Rav Nachman. The one against Rabba had to do with the Safta case, and that we went through that whole case and what it was, and where we finally got at the end of that sugya to the quote that Abaye pulled from that sugya and used it as a difficulty on Rabba. And then from there we got to, we also had to understand the opposite opinion of Rav Huna, which Rabbi Elazar explained to us, that if you say acharecha, it's as if you said, I'm giving you the money now, even though she's only going to get it much later, and even though she doesn't ever actually end up getting it because she dies first, it's as if it was in her possession from right then. And obviously, Rabba and the rabbis in Israel who disagree don't think that. They think it's not considered me'achshav. Only if you say the words, from now I'm giving it to you, but it will be in the grandmother's possession until then, but not if you don't say the words from now. And then we just had these 4 psikot of Rav Papa, and with that we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day, and we should hear Sarot Tovot. Should have good news.